It's no secret that Dragapult is the best deck in the Pokemon TCG right now, and if you click on this video, I'm sure you already know that, but the thing about it is, we all kind of find these different levels of grief when it comes to Dragapult, right? Some of us are in denial, some of us are in depression, just depressed of the format. Some of us are angry at the format and angry at the decks that are out there that can't beat Dragapult. What's important is we all reach that fifth stage of grief, and that is acceptance. And the reality is, if you want to give yourself the best chance to win at the Pokemon TCG, your best bet is to play Dragapult. And you can either go ahead and accept that, or you can keep trying other things, but eventually you will make your way towards this deck. And what's important to note with this deck is that it's so good that there's multiple ways to play this deck, and they're all very extremely viable right now. I mean, all three of the most popular versions of Dragapult, which include Blaziken, Dusknoir, and Crushing Hammers, are all very strong right now in the Pitch Black format. And honestly, you gotta watch out for all three when it comes to Worlds this year. But what's really unique about Dragapult specifically is that all three of these decks are very different. Yeah, they have the same engine. They mostly, for the most part, use Dragapult as the main attacker, but they all have different benefits and different things about them that aren't necessarily great. So today I really just wanna kind of touch up on all the pros and cons of each version of Dragapult and hopefully give you an idea of which version of the deck you like to play. Like I said, I think all three versions are in a really good spot right now, especially Blaziken, because Blaziken prior to this format felt like it was always kind of the odd one out, but I think right now it's in a really strong place, especially with new decks like Mega Excadrill in the format. So if you guys enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below which version of Dragapult is your favorite, and while you're down there, make sure you sub to the channel. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it here. So as I kind of go through these slides here, most of these screenshots and these deck lists are from this Twitter account here, PokeHive. They always post different stats from online tournaments, limitless pages and stuff like that. So that's where a lot of this data is kind of coming from that I'm showing. And it's a good resource for just kind of getting some information on the metagame in general. Again, it is based off of online results for the most part. So this is not for sure this is what the meta is going to look like in offline events, but just to kind of give us an idea here. So let's first talk about Dragapult with Crushing Hammers. This is, I'd say, by far the most popular version of Dragapult. A lot of the top players gravitate towards this one. There's a lot of good reasons why I think a lot of top players prefer this version of Dragapult over the other ones, which I'll get into right here. First and foremost, it is by far considered the most consistent version of Dragapult, which is ironic because the primary feature of this deck is a coin flip card, right? So it's kind of ironic that we're saying it's the most consistent, but in reality it is. And that's because that compared to other versions of Dragapult, right, we don't have these deck slots that are taken up by Duskulls or Torchics or Rare Candies or Blazikens or Dusclopses. We have more room in the deck to kind of fill it with more consistency cards, an extra Crispin here, a Dunsplash line here, an extra Monkey Dory, a certain tech card or whatever the case might be. So it kind of gives us more room to really focus on consistency within the deck and allowing us to kind of fit in specific tech cards for the deck. And the really big benefit of this deck that the other decks don't necessarily have is just that combination of Crushing Hammers with Stamp. So with Crushing Hammer, it's an item card, you can use it throughout the game, and sure, you can use it early on, and sometimes it makes sense to use it early on when your opponent first attaches an energy, but I think what really makes this version of the deck very strong is when you combine Crushing Hammers with an Unfair Stamp or a red card. You kind of combine both disruption options, and it can really just flip the entire game around and give yourself a chance to claw back into it. The problem with a lot of decks right now in the format is that they don't have these great comeback tools that we've previously had. Things like Iono are not in the format right now, so for a lot of decks, if you find yourself behind early on, it's very hard to come back. And with this version of Dragapult specifically, you kind of always have a chance to claw your way back when you have to Unfair Stamp and Crushing Hammer. And as I already mentioned, another benefit with this deck is that you do have room for tech cards. So we see people including the Moltres or maybe the Chi-Yu as well, different kind of tech cards depending on what's meta relevant. So I think this is a very adaptable version of the deck where you can kind of look in the room and say, okay, this is popular right now, so I need to include this card in my deck to give myself a chance. And when it comes to some of the cons of the deck here, the first one I have here is losing to Crustle. For the most part, this version of the deck just loses to Crustle. A lot of people don't necessarily tech for Crustle. You can, which kind of goes back to my previous point. If you want to tech for Crustle, you can definitely fit in tech cards for Crustle, but the question is, how useful are they for other matchups? Is it worth including? Some of these other versions of Dragapult, they kind of naturally have answers to Crustle that this deck doesn't, right? So in a Dragapult Dusknoir, for example, we don't necessarily have to tech for Crustle because Dusknoir just naturally can attack into Crustle, right? So we kind of naturally have somewhat of an answer into Crustle. With this version, for the most part, we don't have any answer for Crustle, and we would have to specifically tech for Crustle. And a lot of times those tech cards for Crustle, they're not really like that effective in other matchups. So that's why we don't really see it too much in these deck lists or these versions of Dragapult. So that is kind of a downside off the bat. If Crustle becomes more popular, then you kind of have to cut some cards to fit in those Crustle techs. The other downside with this version of the deck compared to the other ones is that you really don't have the damage output that some of these other versions of Dragapult have. Dragapult Dusknoir, which I'll get to later, is obviously very high damage output. You can hit for 330 in one turn essentially with Dusknoir plus Phantom Dive. With Blaziken, you know, we are capped out at 200 as well, but now we have a fire type attacker which we can use in certain matchups to hit for higher numbers. With this version, we don't really have that. We don't have a way to hit for more than 200 for the most part, and we really don't have answers to some of these other decks like, you know, Zoroark, for example. It can be kind of awkward with the math and everything, so there are certain matchups where you want to be able to do more damage and you just can't really reach those numbers with this version of the deck. And so when we look at this PokeHive data here, again, this is based off of some online results and things like that. You'll see for the most part, the chart here is like a light green, yellow kind of color, which means that for the most part, into the entire field, we're either winning or we are pretty much even for the most part. So we're right around that like 45 and up kind of range, right? So 45% is kind of our lowest, aside from that basic box at the very bottom, which is red, obviously. So for the most part, we do have a pretty favorable matchup into most decks, or at least give ourselves a 50-50 chance into beating those decks. And we really kind of see the power of the crushing hammers, because when you look at some of these decks, you would think naturally that they would just beat Dragapult. For example, Delmise, right, with the Clefairy, being able to hit with a single prizer for weakness. You would think on paper, right, that deck should do pretty well against Dragapult. And right off the bat, my first thought is, I think it would do pretty well into Dragapult, but I can also see a world where if you're able to crushing hammer and get rid of energies and hand disrupt, and you know, they don't have a Dunsparce down, they don't have a way to draw cards, like you could definitely win those matchups pretty easily for the most part. So I definitely think that's the case for those types of matchups. And even stuff like Alakazam. Alakazam plays a pretty low energy count, for the most part, mostly telepathic energy, which is special energy, so they can't recover it. So those hammers really kind of put in the work in that matchup. And again, all it takes is those 1 or 2 turns and you are able to just kind of board wipe at times. So it's definitely very effective to have hammers as well. And as you see at the very bottom, we do have stuff like Grimmsnarl down there and Basic Box. Those are kind of some of our worst matchups. Basic Box, a deck that uses a bunch of different EX Pokemon. Again, stuff like Kangaskhan, you're not really able to one-shot them. Energies is not really a problem for that deck. They have Teal Mask for the most part. Well, some of them don't have Teal Mask, but a lot of them have ways to get energy on board pretty fast. So hammers don't really do that much in that matchup. And same thing for something like a Grimmsnarl, for example. You know, you have the built-in ability to just basically accelerate energies to your board, so hammer's not really doing too much in that matchup. And right here is kind of an example list of a Hammerpult. Again, this is from the PokeHive, you know, Twitter account, so if you go on there, you can find more lists and stuff like that as well. This is pretty close to what I would play if I were to play this version of the deck, because I have been testing it out a little bit myself. I do think Yveltal right now is not necessarily worth including. It can be good at times, but a lot of people are choosing not to play it. But this is a pretty good example list right here. Most Hammerpults are running a 1-1 to Dunsparce line in combination with that Risky Ruins, and that's kind of what makes up for that lack of damage output. It kind of allows you to spread damage faster onto the bench, allowing you to take multiple knockouts like that. So even if you can't, you know, hit the active for a lot, you can maybe hit the active, move 20 damage to like a bench, you know, Impidimp or something, and then now you can take a knockout on the bench that otherwise you wouldn't be able to. So out of all 3 versions of Dragapult, this is the one that for the most part plays Risky Ruins, and this kind of allows you to go for some of those multiple knockout types of turns. And it really is like pure consistency here. The only other change here would be like the 1 Rose's Encouragement. I've seen people cut that and add the 3rd Crispin. It's just kind of up to, you know, what you want to do essentially. We do have room for 2 monkeys in this list, which is very nice. The 3rd Night Stretcher, the 3rd Dark Energy. So again, just kind of more consistency cards. We're able to draw more cards because of the Dunsparce. So this is a good deck to just consistently be able to play the game and consistently get out what you want. And then whenever you do need those comeback mechanics, or you do just need that little extra edge in the matchup, that's where the Crushing Hammers come into play. Up next, we do have Dragapult Dusknoir. This is definitely like historically my favorite version of Dragapult. This is what I've been playing for the most part when I go to tournaments and stuff like that. And it's honestly probably the strongest version on paper. I would say, you know, the one big flaw of the deck, which I'll get to here, is that it is a little bit worse in the mirror match into just Dragapult in general. But this definitely is the highest damage output version of Dragapult, allowing you to basically hit for 130 with Dusknoir and Phantom Dive on top of that, so you're hitting the active for 330 and putting 60 on the bench. So you are able to just hit for those higher numbers. You can one-shot a Kangaskhan, you can one-shot an opposing Dragapult, one-shot a Grimmsnarl, so it just allows you to go for those big numbers that otherwise you can't go for with the other versions of Dragapult. It also gives you a huge advantage against all these single prize decks, especially into stuff like Festival Lead, Alakazam, the Delmise with Hide and Sneak, all that kind of stuff. Like, Dusknoir helps out so much with that because you can really just wipe boards with Dusknoir, and there's not a whole lot that they can do. You combine that with like a not a rare candy, with an unfair stamp or a red card, and you are really hurting your opponents. It's definitely the most effective version of red card, I would say, because you can kind of force your opponent into a red card. If your opponent's at 4 prize cards, you pop a Dusknoir, now they're at 3 prize cards, now you can red card. So you can kind of force that hand disruption, which is really nice with this version of the deck. And then the other benefit too of this version is that you do have room for candies or hammers. We've kind of seen that, especially at NAIC and prior regionals and stuff like that. Some versions are playing Rare Candy with Dusknoir, others are playing Hammers with Dusknoir, and I think out of all versions of Dragapult, this version specifically, you kind of have that up in the airness, if that makes sense. Your opponent's not going to know right away if you're playing candies or hammers. You can use that to your advantage as well. If hammers are very popular in Dragapult Dusknoir and you decide to play candies, you can really kind of catch your opponent slipping and just kind of go for the big plays early on. So that's what's really nice about this version, is that you do have some room for rare candy or crushing hammers. And just depending on what the meta looks like and what you feel like you need, you do have the ability to kind of use one or the other, or even potentially both if you really wanted to. But I would probably stick to one over the other just to kind of make it more consistent. Some of the downsides here are that it is historically worse in the mirror match. The reason for that is because if you don't get those Duskulls down early on, you really can't get them set up. It's very hard to get them set up later. You can kind of put your opponent in situations where, like, late in the game, if you bench 2 Duskulls, you can kind of say, hey, like, one of these guys are going to evolve up, you know what I'm saying? If you have that ability to spare surprise cards. But for the most part, if you don't get them down early, they're not going to come out. And then essentially you are just playing a, less consistent version of Dragapult at that point without Ghosts, because they're not coming out that game, you know what I mean? The other downside is Psyduck is a specific counter card for Dusknoir. So if, Dusknoir is expected to be popular and people are playing Psyduck, it's going to hurt you, obviously. I know previously stuff like Mega Absol, back when that was a popular deck, Psyduck kind of hurt with that deck. Alakazam plays Psyduck. Some Festival League plays it as well. So it could definitely be a card that kind of hurts you. And then again, last point here is that it does really depend on that early setup, more so than some of these other versions of Dragapult, because Duskull does have 60 HP. If Duskull had 70 HP, honestly, this is probably the best version, like, by far, of Dragapult, I feel like. But the reality is they have 60 HP, and a lot of times against Dragapult specifically, we kind of struggle to get them out. Here are some data for Dragapult Dusknoir. Best matchup on paper is Festival League by far. It makes a lot of sense. As somebody that was playing Festival League for a little bit here, I can definitely say that matchup hurts as Festival League. It's very tough to deal with Dragapult Dusknoir for sure. What's interesting is that in this data, Dragapult Dusknoir versus Dragapult is actually favored for Dragapult Dusknoir. I think historically, though, it's kind of the other way around. If you ask anybody, if you just look at tournament results in general, like regional results and stuff like that, it is the other way around. If this was the case, I think everybody would be playing this version of Dragapult Dusknoir. So again, take these results here, or this meta kind of breakdown with a grain of salt. This is kind of based off of online stuff as well. So nothing like set in stone here. This just kind of give us an idea of what it looks like on paper. But I would say it is a little bit flipped there, and I think Dragapult Dusknoir does do worse for the most part into Dragapult with crushing hammers. But it is pretty interesting here because a lot of this win percentage is kind of sub 50. We're looking at pretty much everything under 50% for the most part. The one matchup that is definitely much higher than the crushing hammer version of Dragapult is Grimmsnarl, as you can see here. And again, I think a big part of that is you are able to one-shot Grimmsnarl. You're able to pop a Dusclops onto a Monkey Dory and knock one of those guys out. So you have a lot of tools with this version of the deck that you don't really have with the Crushing Hammers version that allows you to kind of win that matchup. So I definitely think that makes a lot of sense, being favored into Grimmsnarl. Or I guess in this case, it's not even favored, it's just like slightly unfavored, but you know, it's much closer for the most part on paper. Same thing with like End Zoroark, you're able to potentially one-shot Zoroarks, which is very nice, or you can pop a Dusclops, move 30 damage, knock out a Zoroark like that. So you have a lot more tools and ways to kind of deal with that. This right here is another list that I pulled from PokeHive. This is pretty close to what I would play for the most part. For the longest time, like recently, I would say I've been playing the Crushing Hammers, Dragapult Dusknoir kind of version. But if I was to play candies, I think I would basically play this exact list. I think the only changes I would make is cut Jamming Tower for a second Watchtower, I would say, and then maybe cut a Badoo and put that somewhere else. Probably like a third candy, I would say. I think, honestly, I think Dragapult Dusknoir is in a spot right now where I think I kind of would prefer candies, and the reason I say that is because I think in the matchups where Badoo doesn't exist, I think candies is really, really good. And even in the matchups where Badoo does exist, I feel like most Dragapults are cutting down to one Badoo, and there are going to be times where they can't find that Badoo or it's prized or whatever the case might be, and you can take full advantage of that too. So, or you can win the Monkey War and get the Badoo off the field right away. So I think that candies is kind of the way to go right now if I was to play Dragapult Dusknoir, and it would be something pretty close to this list right here. But the last version of Dragapult we have here is Dragapult Blaziken, and I've kind of been finding myself getting back into this version of Dragapult. Whenever rotation first happened, this is what I was playing for the most part, and then eventually I kind of switched back over to Dragapult Dusknoir. But as of recently, this is what I've been playing. I think it's really good in pitch black formats. There's a lot of reasons why it's good, so let's talk about it. We are good versus Hammers. Crushing Hammers does not do a whole lot against this because you have the ability with Seething Spirit to bring energies back from your discard pile and attach them to your Pokemon. So for the most part, we have ways to go ahead and deal with that. Hammers are not nearly as effective against this version of Dragapult. What's also nice is that we have the ability to hit for fire weakness. And in the past, this wasn't really a big deal because there's nothing really relevant that's weak to fire. But now we have Mega Excadrill, which on paper is very good against Dragapult. We now have a way to one-shot that. So basically kind of saying, hey, if I'm up against Mega Excadrill and you decide to put that thing into play, you now have a 3-prize liability that can just get one-shot by Blaziken at any point in the game. So it actually is relevant. It's very nice in that matchup specifically, and I think that is a matchup that is relevant enough to actually say that, hey, Blaziken is pretty good for that matchup. What's also nice, and this kind of includes the same token as Blaziken, is that we do have alternative attackers to just Dragapult. Most notably, I would say, besides Blaziken, is going to be the Clefairy, which pretty much no other version of Dragapult is playing. Clefairy is a very nice card for the mirror matchup, specifically to deal with Dragapult. It's very good against stuff like Lucario as well, anything that's Psychic weak. So it's very nice to just have an alternative attacker here, or even attacker where you can go, sometimes, you can donk your opponent, going second and going for a Crispin onto Clefairy. So that is a play that does come up sometimes, but it is very nice to just have other options aside from Dragapult, depending on what you're playing against. And another positive here is that it is much easier to set up things like Monkey Dory because we do have that ability to accelerate energy from the discard piles. So a lot of times what's really nice and what I find myself doing with this deck is early on you have a bad hand, or you need to just burn an Ultra Ball, just to get something in play. A lot of times you can discard energies early on, like a Dark Energy or whatever the case might be. You don't want to discard all your energies, but a lot of times you can discard 1 or 2 energies early on, and then once Blaziken comes online, you could easily get those into play. So it's very easy to set up Monkey Dory. It's honestly pretty easy to set up multiple Monkey Dory, and that can be very good in a lot of different matchups, especially in the mirror match. Some of the cons here is that it is less consistent than the other versions of Dragapult. This one relies a lot heavier on rare candy for the most part. Pretty much everybody is only playing one Combuskin, so we are basically relying on rare candy to get Blaziken online, so it can be very inconsistent against item lock specifically. And again, we are running some heavier accounts of Blaziken, so sometimes we are just kind of not being consistent enough to be able to play the game. This version typically does play 2 Dragapults instead of 3 Dragapults, so a lot of times if we prize one or we discard one early on, it can be hard to find that Dragapult under item lock. Another downside is that we don't have as many ways to disrupt. We do play Unfair Stamp. You could play Secret Box, I guess. We do play Red Card, right? like the other versions, but we don't have ways to disrupt like with Crushing Hammer or like with Dragapult Dusknoir being able to just knock out multiple things at once. We don't have those options that those other versions of the deck have, so we do have less ways to disrupt. And another downside is that Blaziken can get stuck. I don't really find this too much of a problem though, if I'm being honest. I know a lot of people have said that with Blaziken, you can just boss it up and, you know, get it to stick or whatever, but like, honestly, with Blaziken, I pretty often just try to prioritize having one energy down on it at all times just to make sure it can't get stuck. That way, if something, you know, they do try to stick it or whatever, you could just accelerate one from the discard pile, attach an energy from turn on something else, and you're still good to go. So that's not too much of an issue if you plan around it, but it definitely can come up at times where you do get stuck. Here is some of the matchup data, and surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, depending on how much you've been paying attention to Pitch Black, we've kind of got the best matchups in comparison to the other versions. Like, everything's kind of green here, right? Like, we only have 3 that are sub 50. Everything else is pretty much above 55% here. Now, I definitely agree with this one in saying that Zoroark is very unfavored. I think that you basically don't have an answer into that deck. I think that's gotta be one of your worst matchups with this version, honestly, because Dragapult Dusknoir, you can technically one-shot Zoroark, right? And then the Crushing Hammer build, you can kind of disrupt with Crushing Hammer, Unfair Stamp. With this version, we really don't have a lot of answers in the Zoroark, so I definitely think that is probably your worst matchup with this version of the deck. And basic blocks make sense too as to why it's unfavored, but I do think that we have a certain card that can help us in that matchup if they play Teal Mask, which I guess basic blocks really doesn't play Teal Mask anymore that much, so we still have some tools that we can use for that, I feel like, though. And this right here is the list that I'm playing right now. This I actually took from TCG Live or whatever, so this one's not from PokeHive. This is the list that I'm playing currently, and you'll notice that I am playing the single prize Blaziken. I think it is worth including. A lot of people are not including it. I just think it's dumb not to include it personally. Like, the way that I feel about this card, like, I think it's worth including. Well, first off, if you guys don't know what it does, let me go ahead and pull it up for you. It helps to have some context here. So the single prize Blaziken, it has the Inferno Kick Flurry attack. So for 3 energies, which is a heavy attack cost, I understand, you're able to hit for 120 on the active and 120 on the bench. I think this is worth including for a lot of different reasons. For the most part, I guess the simplest answer to it is a lot of people in Blaziken are including a Moltres or a Chi-Yu to deal with Crustle, or like these little tech cards for certain matchups or whatever. To me, if you're gonna reserve a slot for that, it makes more sense to have it be the single prize Blaziken, because number one, you're never gonna be able to start this. Like, you don't have to risk starting this card whatsoever. And then number two, you know, if you do need it for a certain matchup, you can prioritize setting this up over other stuff. You can prioritize setting your cloaks up for the draw engine and then setting this up as your primary attacker or whatever. I just feel like this helps in so many different matchups, whereas a Moltres or a Chi-Yu, they only help in certain matchups. With this card right here, if you get it set up, I think it just turns Crustle into an auto-win matchup. If you're up against something that plays Teal Mask Ogerpon, you could bring a Teal Mask Ogerpon to the active, hit the active for weakness and knock it out, and then do 120 onto the bench, onto like a Kangaskhan or something, setting up a Phantom Dive knockout the following turn, very easy. It's good against single prize stuff as well. You're able to take multiple knockouts like that. So I just think there's a lot of uses with this card where it's like, if you are gonna include a tech card, I just feel like this is the one that's worth including. I get it, it can be hard to set up, you know, it's not the most consistent card in the world, but I think for what you're including it for, it makes sense for it to be this card, if that makes sense. But yeah, this is the list that I'm running right now. Pretty standard for the most part, besides that single prize Blaziken. I am going with 2 Crispin. I think that it could just be nice for early aggressive plays. It could be nice for setting up the baby Blaziken. And it could just be nice in general for just setting up multiple attackers and kind of just like, you know, proofing your board from any kind of disruption. I think the Area 0 is really nice as well for the deck. It allows you to just kind of build your board wide and then get rid of all your liabilities on the board. It can be very good for setting up multiple Monkey Dories, for having more of your cloaks on the board, just for stuff like that in general. So yeah, I feel really good about this version of the deck. This is what I've been playing and I've been enjoying. It's been working out well on TCG Live, and honestly, I might take this to my next tournament, my next local, so we'll see how it goes. But that's what I've got here today for you guys. That's kind of my breakdown of all 3 versions of Dragapults. There are more versions out there. You can play Dragapult with Greninja, Dragapult with Toucannon, and Noctowl. Like, there are more versions, but these are pretty much the 3 strongest, best, most popular versions of Dragapults. If you're gonna play Dragapult, if you're gonna just accept the fact that you have to play Dragapult, you might as well pick one of the versions that's very good, and these three are all very good in my opinion right now. But again, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know what your favorite version is. I'd appreciate a subscribe as well. Helps out the channel a lot. Hope you guys have a good one, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.